Benjamin Humphrey is one of the best designers at Atlassian, and he's been on the Jira team for 18 months, and now he leads getting started experiences across all of our products. But I'm sure you're probably tired of listening to me, or just tired, so let's just get it over with.
Thank you, Dave, for that intro. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I know it's like the last session on the last day, and you're all really tired, like a little bit hungover still, maybe not, hopefully not. So as Dave said, my name is Benjamin Humphrey. I'm a designer at Atlassian. I've been with Atlassian for 18 months. Most of it I've spent on the Jira team. Last year I worked on Jira Agile as the designer for Jira Agile. So before we get started, again, if you've got any questions, make sure you put them on Confluence questions. And let's get started. So enterprise tools are rubbish. They usually look like this. They're really, really complex, hard to use. They have a lot of terminology, a lot of jargon in them. They're gray. They're like really crazy and complex, and sometimes they're really slow. So today I'm going to talk about how we design beautiful enterprise software at Atlassian and really delightful enterprise software for end users, and some strategies we employ on the Jira team to make that a reality. And I'm hoping that you guys will be able to use those same things and if you're building plugins for ecosystem, or even if you're working in a company and you need some design tips and tricks. So I'm going to start by redefining what enterprise software is, and then talk about some challenges, and then bust some common misconceptions and myths. So start out redefining enterprise software. Well, what is enterprise software? Wikipedia gives the following definition. It's purpose-designed computer software used in the furtherance of the needs and objectives of the organization as opposed to the individual. Now, I don't want to work in some dystopic future. I want to empower the end user, right? We want end users to have a really delightful experience as well as administrators. So I redefined it to say enterprise software is a scalable tool used by ordinary people to get their primary job done. You notice here that I haven't really mentioned the organization or the company here. I'm really thinking about these people as humans and not just users. We often refer to them as users, but I refer to them as people or folk. One of the things that we do at Atlassian we're guilty of is we often think about the purchaser when we're designing software and building features. We think about the administrator and the purchaser, and usually the purchaser is not the end user. If you think of a really large instance, the purchaser makes up a small fraction of the number of people using the instance. If you have 100 people, you probably have one admin and 99 end users. But who thinks about them when we're trying to sell to the admin, to the purchaser? There's a term called the consumerization of IT, and that's otherwise known as BYOD, which is bring your own device. And basically, that is people bringing their own device into work, like their own phone, their own laptop, for a few reasons. The one that they've got at home that they're using for their own personal use is probably newer and shinier than the one that you get given at work. The one at work, they have to pay for that, so it saves companies money. And they don't have to carry around like two phones all the time. I don't know how many of you carry around two phones, one work phone and one personal phone. It really sucks. It's a similar term called the consumerization of enterprise software. So by this I mean people are using really good software at home, like Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Spotify, Instagram, and so on their Android tablet, their iPad, iPhone. And they expect that level of quality at work too. After all, they are working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Why should they not have a delightful and enjoyable time using that software? We often confuse power and professionalism with utilitarianism. So you notice a lot of blue going on in enterprise products. A lot of companies are trying to change this. They're trying to make their experiences more delightful. So Atlassian, Evernote, Google in the last few years, Xero. But we still have a way to go. And enterprise software is actually really hard to design, which brings me to the challenges of it. So I'm going to walk through a few challenges that I've come across when designing Jira. And I had to pick only 3. There are quite a few. And I'm going to sort of show what we've done to try and overcome those. So the first challenge is scaling the design. And when I mention scaling in this context, you're probably thinking, okay, performance and capacity, like the Jira Data Center stuff we just launched. But what I actually mean here is scaling the user interface and the interaction patterns we use to handle anywhere from 5 issues, 10 issues, 5 users, 5 projects, up to 500, 5,000 issues, and so on. In Mike's keynote, you saw that some of our top instances have almost 1 million issues. And so how does something work for both small teams and large teams? Here are some examples from Jira where we've had to make changes to sort of scale the design. So I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, the create issue dialog, the assignee field was a dropdown, not a type ahead. So if you have 5 users and they're alphabetized, no worries, just click it, choose them. If you've got 500, it gets a bit tiresome to scroll through all this list of people. So we added a type ahead field where you just type the name and it hits enter. Now, it's something that you don't really think of, but this is all the stuff we have to make every day, the decisions we have to make. If you have Jira Agile, you're probably familiar with this problem. It's called the salmon swimming upstream problem. And basically, you're dragging an issue up through the backlog to a sprint or to the top of the backlog, and you can be fighting against a scroll. So to solve this, we added a right-click context menu. So you can right-click on an issue or a group of issues and go send to top of backlog and send to sprint. Now, how many of you knew that you could do that? A few people. All right, so the problem with this is that most people don't realize they can right-click in a browser. In a browser, you expect to see inspect elements, save page as, all that sort of stuff. So we still have a wee bit to go here in terms of discoverability. But at least now you guys know. So the other one is the Manage Boards page, again from Jira Agile. Works really well when you've got 10, 20 boards. But when you have a few hundred boards, like some of our really large customers, not only is it a performance problem, it takes a very long time to load, but there's no search, there's no categorization, there's no recently viewed grouping. So we found that, like, on average, a user will maybe use 2 or 3 boards in their workflow day to day, and they don't care about the rest of them, but it's just an alphabetized list. So why not have like a recently viewed group or something at the top and a quick search? And the good news is that this was actually addressed in a Ship It project. Some of our developers did last Ship It, and it's hopefully going to ship pretty soon. Lastly, we have 1,500 add-ons in the marketplace, and we need to make sure that we're extensible for add-ons. So we need to have plugin points, APIs, and truncation strategies to make sure that you can have any add-on installed that you like, and it's not going to break the user interface. Here's an example of the application header. Things get truncated into this more pattern instead of just wrapping over search field and so on like that. And we do this all over the place. Now, when I go and visit customers, and we do contextual inquiries, and we go and visit them in their office, and I sit and I see Jira, I'm always surprised at what I'm seeing, because often they've customized the look and feel, a new logo, all that sort of stuff, and then all these plugins, it's basically unrecognizable. So it's really hard for us when we're designing to try and replicate real life. We can often suffer from designing in a bubble, so we've got to try and avoid that. The second challenge is accessibility. If any of you went to Jonathan Crennaughn's talk this morning, he talked a little bit about accessibility. So Atlassian's tools are not 100% accessible, but we're well on our way. Here's an example that you're probably quite familiar with. Now, if you're colorblind, which seats are available here? Well, they're all brown, but actually, there's a few that are available and a bunch that are not. Now, this is the problem here is that they're relying on color alone to convey meaning. So you need to pair color with a symbol or text so that your colorblind users can understand. For example, in Jira, we have the status lozenges. So it's green, that's cool, but if I'm colorblind, I can still read the word resolved. Our primary palette in the Atlassian design guidelines passes a contrast ratio of 3:1. So that is actually compliant. I think it's AA in Europe and APAC, and then for America, I'm not sure what it's called. But a lot of our customers need to, they're legally obligated to ensure that the tools they're providing to their users meet a certain criteria level, government and institutions and so on. Who's familiar with this screen? So this is what we call Electric Charlie internally. And Electric Charlie sucks for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it can actually cause epileptic fits and seizures. I'm not seeing anybody now, so that's quite good. But it's also not very useful. There's no clear call to action. What do I do? When's it going to be back? I don't have any estimate on when it's going to be back. Who do I contact if I really need to get some work done? So in ADG2, we released new system notifications pattern, which has a pattern for doing 404s, 500 pages, and so on. It tells you clearly what it is, doesn't give you a seizure, and has an opportunity to put a message there, and for some things, you can actually subscribe to email updates to know when your service is back up. The third challenge I'm going to talk about is a long shelf life. So what do I mean by this? This is desktop operating system market share just a couple of months ago. You can see Windows 7's got 51% of the market. Windows XP, what the hell is that doing there? 25% of the market still use Windows XP. Windows XP was released 12 years ago in 2001, and if you look down the bottom there, the last Service Pack 3 was 6 years ago. How is 25% of the world still using this thing that was built 12 years ago? And I think if I imagine I was a designer on the Windows team working on Windows XP, did they think that they were designing something in 2001 that would still be used 12 years later by like a quarter of the world's desktop users? That's kind of crazy. I could be designing Jira 7 right now, and people would still be using it in 2026. Now, thankfully, people actually upgrade Jira more frequently than Windows XP and Windows. But this raises a good point. I have talked to a few customers at Summit, and they're still on Jira 5, Jira 6, pre-ADG, that sort of stuff. So when we're building the ADG, we need to make sure that we avoid trends. We need to have it as simple and as long-lasting as possible, just in case it's around for a couple more years and people don't upgrade for whatever reason. We have to avoid trends like skeuomorphism and the opposite, which is flat design. So we try really hard in the ADG to avoid things like parallax scrolling, iOS 7 style blur, skeuomorphism, and so on. You won't see any of that stuff in the ADG. Lastly, I want to talk about some common myths and misconceptions that I've heard about enterprise design. So my background is in consumer design. I was a designer for Delicious.com for a while, a couple of years ago. And so Atlassian is the first company I've actually worked at where I've been designing enterprise tools. So I'm a nice guy, but I'm a grumpy designer. Designers often have this thing where they sort of look around and think everything's shit. It's all shit. Really, really cynical about stuff because we're just super critical. We also have very thick skins because everything we produce gets criticized to death. Usually I'm a nice chap, but yeah, I can be grumpy sometimes. So the first myth is that enterprise users don't expect the software they use at work to be designed well. And I'm hoping that earlier I sort of convinced you that that's not the case. There's no real reason why people can't have a great experience at work just like they do at home. People are more productive with better designed software, and they're also people, they're humans. It doesn't hurt for us to include a bit of delight in there and make their day better. Atlassian's business model relies heavily on word of mouth. So if you're an end user at one company and you love Jira, you love Confluence, you love HipChat, when you go to another company and you happen to get a promotion and you're a purchaser now and you get to make a decision on which tool that company should use, aren't you more likely to choose one of the things that you actually enjoyed using as opposed to looking at like this feature comparison checklist? I couldn't find any stats, unfortunately, on productivity and ease of use, so I made this chart. You just have to trust me. But basically, the easier the software is to use, the more productive people are. And this just makes sense, right? If you're presented with a screen that has a lot of technical jargon, a lot of terminology, the learning curve, the barrier to entry is really, really high. If you have a poor visual hierarchy, then nobody knows where to click when they first see it for the first time. So we need to make sure that our software is really well designed and that it only takes a couple of steps to do the most common tasks as opposed to 15, 20 clicks to do the most common tasks. We need to identify what those tasks are and design for that. Myth 2, enterprise software has to be utilitarian and complex. I think that it can be human and easy to use. And by human, we've been throwing this word around a lot in the design team, and it's been a real emphasis for us in the last couple of years. So again, it's on this whole notion of delighting people. And we often confuse power with delightfulness. So you can still be kind of approachable and friendly without feeling like it's a kid's toy. Here's some examples from our products. In the new HipChat design, you see, we've still got the blue and we've still got the gray, and it feels pretty powerful. But we've got a little bit of orange there, a little bit of color, and then an empty state with an emoticon, a dog emoticon. In the ADG2 writing style, we've actually updated the spec here. And we've broken it down to 4 principles. And the first principle is speak human, and that's very intentional. We are trying to, like if you take all the language out of a product, take all the copy out of it, it's completely useless. Language and copywriting is the most important thing in design for software, in my opinion. It's the way that we communicate with people through the user interface. So think of an error message, something like, the server cannot be contacted. Think of it on a big red background. And then think of somebody who may not know what they're doing that much. They start to blame themselves for the problem. Classic example is confirmation dialogues, second guessing the user. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you really sure you want to do this? I'm really, really sure. Suddenly they're like, holy crap, I was just about to delete something, but now I think the world's going to end. So instead what we want to do is say, okay, let them delete it, but provide an undo option. And if you see in Android, I'm sure a lot of you are Android users and iPhone users, that's more and more of a pattern you start to see. You swipe something away and it has an undo option. Anyway, I diverge. Contractions are really important, something you don't think about very often. But if we go back to our error message, the server cannot be contacted. Say the server can't be contacted. Just contract that down. Will not, won't, so on and so forth. And we're trying to push more of a conversational tone as well. So there's no reason not to refer to the software as a person and saying the users are you and I'm a me or we or so on and so forth. Another strategy we've been employing recently is illustrations, both through our brand. You might have seen a lot more illustrations this year at Summit, and in the products. Now we tried stock photography as a method of bringing more sort of personality into the products in a spike earlier in the year. And we felt that the photography, the problem with photos is that they require a lot more processing in your brain, and it sort of distracts from the UI. Illustrations are great because they can introduce color, a bit of delightfulness and humor, and they feel like they fit in. We can also provide a more consistent sort of guidelines around illustration style, but photography, what do you start talking about? Depth of field, colors, and all that sort of stuff. The third myth, if I add more features, I'll sell more software. So this is the classic one that you're probably all familiar with, and it's the old sort of design product manager fight. So I actually believe that ease of use enhances experience more than features. I feel like this argument could have been made a few years ago when enterprise software was bought and sold from this feature comparison checklist. I'm sure you've all seen them. You go to a site, it's like, Jira can do all of this stuff. Rally can do all of this stuff, so on and so forth. But if we look at some examples over the last few years, we can see examples of software products that have disrupted incumbents, not by adding more features, but actually being better designed and easier to use. So if we look at Google Maps versus TomTom or GPS providers or MapQuest, Google Maps came along, it was released. It didn't have nearly as many features as these ones when it was first released, yet it had a better experience, it was faster and better, it looked better. Classic one is MySpace versus Facebook. Don't know if you've used MySpace. Hands up if you've used MySpace. I had a MySpace profile at some point, a few people. Remember how you could customize the crap out of it? You have like pictures and GIFs and colors and everything all over the place. And then Facebook came along and had hardly any of those features. It was like a breath of fresh air because it had lots of white space and every profile was consistent, so you knew where to go. Another classic example, the original iPhone versus Pocket PCs. So the iPhone was shipped in 2007, didn't have 3G, no keyboard, no multitasking, no app store. Yet, at the start, it was sort of like, oh, can't do hardly anything, why would I buy this? But then Apple proved that through user experience and awesome software, they could dominate the market and absolutely kill it. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. In summary, be human in your design. Remember that you're designing for end users as much as you are for administrators and purchasers. So you need to make sure that they enjoy the software. And if they enjoy the software, you're going to have a lot of benefits. Design for scale. Make sure that everything you're building will work for teams of 5 right up to 500. And lastly, it's not all about features. It's always a fine balance with design. We don't want to have something that doesn't do anything. Like, it still has to provide value for users, but we also don't want to overwhelm the product and make it really complex and hard to use. So this is the stuff that Jira, the design team, is working on excuse me, at the moment and going forwards. So thank you so much. Go to design.atlassian.com for all of that stuff that I showed, and I hope that you use the ADG in your product designs and so on.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much, everybody. I didn't see any questions on Confluence questions, but be sure to still go on the site and ask your questions. Benjamin will tackle them later. He will respond to you in depth and detail for as long as you like. He'll buy you a pizza. I have one question for you, Ben. Mm-hmm. Are you going to win Ship It Live?
Yeah, so Ship It Live is up next, and I've got to go over and present on the main stage. So hopefully, vote
Ship
for me.
It Live, 4:15. Vote for Benjamin. Thank you so much for coming to Summit. Thank you so much for coming out here, and thank you so much for being our customers. Have a great night.